Hi, this is Justin from Sprite Spares, and I just wanted to post a video about shifter feel on these Sprite and Midget smooth case and ribcase gearboxes. So this is pre-1500 gearboxes.
So in the process of rebuilding this gearbox, taking it apart, putting it back together, taking it apart, putting it back together, trying to play with the shifter rod linkage, the detent points, the springs and the slugs, trying to get the feel correct. It was still kind of in no man's land in first gear, so I was trying to diagnose what area it was coming from, whether it was from the remote or the leverage inside, or whether it was the shift points, and I actually narrowed it down to the shifter plate. So what this does is actually controls the gait of the shift. So this is the one that I had on that I was having problems with. This is from another one. So I'll try and show you. You can see that one is actually quite wallered out on the first gear area, which would be right there. So I'll show you another one from another box, which has obviously lower kilometers. That's a much more defined pattern, and it's not beat up. So what this actually contributes to is a much more precise location of the shift points. So nothing to do inside the gearbox or inside the remote itself, but actually just this little shifter plate. A couple of other things to consider when talking about shifter feel with these gearboxes are this spring and plunger assembly. This plunger is what sits at the bottom of the gear shift, and that spring applies pressure to push it up into the shifter plate to give you more direct feel against that plate. So that is located in that socket right down there, and if you've noticed, I have a tiny little washer that I've ground down to the appropriate size to push up a little bit more with this spring and plunger to give it a bit firmer feel on the shifter within the plate. The other thing to consider is this spring and plunger assembly, which is installed into the side of the remote after the shifter is in place. And what this does is this little brass slug presses with spring pressure against this ball of the shifter axially to give it a bit firmer feel side to side. What I've done with this for a little bit of a modification is there's the brass slug, the plunger, there's the spring that seats against it, and inside there I've placed a ball bearing that came out of another gearbox. It's the perfect size. So what this does is it seats the spring a little further in, which puts more pressure on the plunger against the ball of the shifter. So it definitely firms it up axially, as well as having this repositioned to put more pressure vertically. Inside the remote, on the other end, inside the tail shaft, in this section, there is this little plastic bushing, which has to be in place in order to make sure that you have a correct shifter feel. So if that's missing, or if it's worn down, things are going to be loose. If any of these springs are loose or worn, again, if the shifter plate is worn, all of these things will contribute to a sloppy shifter feel. In this gearbox, when I first took it apart, this little spring and plunger was actually sitting deep into the remote, so it was completely all over the place. Obviously, lots of grease on these components. The Lucas extra heavy duty grease is what I'm using. And in order to seal this up, these are actually, because we're in coronavirus lockdown, what I've done is out of some very thin, sort of not quite cardstock, but heavy paper, have cut all my own gaskets out in order to get this thing resealed. So I hope that you've maybe learned something about how these gearboxes work, and if you have problems with your own, consider these things, and if you have any questions, drop me a DM and I'd be glad to help. All right, thanks, bye now.